Thank you so much for this opportunity to talk about the relationship between COVID-19 and evictions in Memphis. And let me say from the outset that systematic analysis of the effects of COVID-19 on the housing sector is complicated by the dynamic nature of the pandemic and the lag time between the availability of most sources of data that would help us at the scale to understand, at the social and spatial scale, to help us understand what's going on very specifically in Memphis. Thus, in this paper, we focus on the spatial patterns of eviction rates in Memphis pre-pandemic and the socioeconomic factors that are key indicators of household likelihood of experiencing housing vulnerability and eviction as a result of the pandemic. I'll close this presentation by suggesting policy measures that could be effective in stemming the likelihood of eviction going forward. The COVID-19 pandemic has exacerbated existing racial inequalities in health, jobs, and housing. These inequalities affect the ongoing effects of structural racism, meaning the intersecting and reinforcing policies, systems, and institutions that create advantages and disadvantages based on race. The impact of structural racism on the housing sector is particularly telling. Black and Latino families have lower rates of homeownership, live in more segregated neighborhoods, pay more for housing, and have been at greater risk for foreclosure than white homeowners. Further, Black and Latinx households are more likely to be renters than white households, and they also face evictions at a much higher rate. Significantly, and despite the state eviction moratorium in the spring and summer of 2020 and the CDC's order, which extended through October 2021, eviction filings in Memphis have continued. Over 18,000 evictions have been filed since the start of the pandemic and are continuing at a rate of 200 to 300 per week. Research suggests that income and cost burden are two key factors relating to housing affordability and eviction. Cost burden is the ratio of income to rent. Lower incomes generally result in higher cost burden as a greater proportion of income is needed to pay rent. Households that pay over 30% of their income in rent are considered cost burden. Significantly, the impacts of COVID-19 have disproportionately affected communities of color and amplified housing insecurity as millions of people have lost income, jobs, and dealt with COVID-19 related health challenges and deaths. National data from the CDC reveals that Black and Latinx people are 2 times more likely to die or be hospitalized due to COVID-19 compared to white people. Asian people are 1 time more likely to die or be hospitalized due to COVID-19 than white people. In Shelby County, Black residents are disproportionately dying from COVID-19. Black residents account for 61% of the COVID-19 deaths, yet only make up 52% of the overall population, while white residents account for 33% of the deaths, COVID-related deaths, but make up 41% of the population. In terms of income and job loss due to the pandemic, Black, Latinx, and Asian women have been hit the hardest. In December 2020, Black, Latinx, and Asian women accounted for all of the 154,000 job losses among women. Significantly, Black and Latinx workers are overrepresented in essential frontline work industries. In Tennessee, Black workers are 16.6% of the workforce overall, but are overrepresented in frontline jobs. 31% of Black workers are in public transit, 31% in trucking, warehouse, and postal positions, and 26% in childcare and social services. Likewise, Latinx Tennesseans, which make up 5% of the workforce, are overrepresented in building, cleaning services at roughly about 14%. In the context of the COVID-19 pandemic, racial disparities in housing security and employment in essential worker roles, as well as vulnerability to COVID-19 related job losses, are crucial to understanding the most effective ways to address the impending housing crisis in Memphis. In the next 3 slides, we'll compare the spatial patterns of high eviction rates and corresponding socioeconomic factors. The map on your left shows the density of evictions calculated by laying a 1/4 mile grid over Shelby County. The colors in the maps indicate the density of evictions. The yellow shows the most dense evictions, and black shows the least. We can see that though evictions are a problem to some degree throughout Memphis, they are disproportionately concentrated in areas including Fraser, South City, Orange Mound, Cordova, and particularly the Mount Moriah, Winchester area in Southwest Memphis. While eviction densities do not show all the housing precarity or injustice in a neighborhood, because they are tracked through legal filing requirements, they do offer a readily available, geographically precise measure of housing insecurity. On the map on your right shows the density of households who paid over 30% of their incomes in rent before the pandemic. Again, we see a strikingly similar pattern between the two maps. Neighborhoods where there are high eviction rates are the same neighborhoods where rent burden is high. Rent burden is particularly concentrated in Southwest Memphis, South City, and Fraser neighborhoods. The maps on this slide demonstrate the racial dimension of the eviction crisis by comparing density of evictions in Memphis with the spatial density of Black residents on your right. Once again, we see a largely similar pattern. Evictions are disproportionately concentrated in areas with high concentrations of Black residents, which in many cases align with historically redlined neighborhoods. Finally, this map reveals the economic dimension of susceptibility to eviction during COVID-19 by comparing density of evictions, again on your left, with the density of residents employed in service, hospitality, or entertainment industry jobs before the pandemic. Significantly, these sectors are most likely to have experienced job loss during the pandemic. Here again, we see the same overall pattern, though somewhat less strongly concentrated than either rent burden households or the density of Black residents. Taken together, these four maps suggest that evictions are a problem throughout Shelby County and that the areas with the highest rates of evictions have a strong spatial relationship to the longstanding patterns of racialized structural inequality. Further, the spatial relationship between workers likely to have lost their jobs and households already facing unaffordable rents prior to the pandemic shows the susceptibility of their neighborhoods to an economic and health shock like COVID-19. Given the spatial patterns demonstrated in the previous slides and the complexity of housing vulnerability in Memphis, a multifaceted policy approach is needed. Current policies range from individual level services for tenants facing eviction to longer term policies to address the housing market dynamics in Memphis. Many eviction prevention and mitigation strategies are specific to the COVID-19 pandemic. These policies include the Emergency Rental Assistance Program, which is funded by the federal government and available through December 31st, 2021. And this program provides direct funds to landlords and MLDW. The CARES Act dollars are also being used to support legal assistance for tenants when they are behind on their rent. Notably, both of these programs do not have long-term sustainable funding sources. Additionally, legal assistance for tenants is also limited by the number of attorneys that are available to volunteer their time. Although both of these programs were enacted in response to COVID-19, they would have been helpful before the pandemic and could be incorporated into an ongoing strategy to assist tenants in the future as well. Additionally, policies to address the larger affordable housing issues in Memphis and prevent evictions in general include increasing the supply of affordable housing, providing legal assistance for all tenants facing eviction, and sealing eviction records so that tenants have an easier time finding housing in the future. Prioritizing the development of affordable housing could help stem the rate of evictions in Memphis. The city needs an estimated 30,000 affordable housing units, and the Memphis Affordable Housing Trust was established to help fill these gaps. However, currently it is underfunded compared to peer cities. It is worth noting that there are many things we don't yet know about the impact of COVID-19 on housing inequality in Memphis as the pandemic is unfolding. However, Recent research has found that neighborhoods with high eviction filing rates also have lower vaccination rates, indicating that higher risk of contracting and serious complications from COVID-19 and evictions are concentrated in the same geographic areas. Additionally, since 2020, rents in Memphis have risen 19%, but wages have risen only 5%. This suggests that the number of rent-burdened households is likely to be on the rise. Non-payment of rent is the most common reason people are evicted. And finally, we should not forget that the pandemic is not over, but the eviction moratorium has ended, and many CARES Act funded programs are ending as well. At the same time, many people are dealing with long COVID, and parents and caregivers of children continue to have to navigate COVID-19 exposures and quarantine restrictions that are disruptive to their employment. What we have shown through spatial analysis is that existing affordable housing shortage, high rent burdens, and low wages put Black and Latinx Memphians at higher risk of eviction before the pandemic, and this risk is further exacerbated by the social and economic realities of the pandemic. Addressing housing inequality requires a long-term view, and the implementation of policies that increase the number of affordable housing units and prevent and mitigate evictions will be necessary to address the chronic housing vulnerability and inequality crisis looming in our city. Thank you.